I, a 25-year-old male, have never seen eye to eye with my stepdad, Rick, who is 52. Their relationship began when he married my mom when I was 15, following only a few months of dating. It's been a decade since, but my disdain for him remains unparalleled. My parents, my mom, aged 47, and my dad, 50, split a few years after my birth, probably when I was about 4 or 5. Initially, my mom had full custody, and my dad had weekend visitation rights. However, when I was around 7, the arrangement shifted, granting my dad partial custody. As a result, I divided my time equally between my parents, forging a close bond with my architect father given my mom's role as a stay-at-home mom. When I was 16, my dad received a promising job offer out of state, which would significantly limit our time together. Around this time, my mom had remarried Rick, who I found detestable. Consequently, I found solace in sharing my grievances about Rick with my dad. Aware of my struggles at home, my dad offered me the opportunity to live with him. Despite my reluctance to leave my mom, I encouraged him to seize the job opportunity, fearing I might hinder his career advancement. Thus, my dad relocated, and our interactions were reduced to occasional video calls and holiday visits, leaving me with a lingering sense of longing. Living with Rick proved to be a tormenting experience. Initially reserved during their courtship, Rick's demeanor took a drastic turn after marriage. He transformed into a relentless bully, constantly belittling me and making life at home unbearable. It became evident that Rick aimed to drive a wedge between us, perhaps to rid our lives of my presence. Despite the hostility, I remained steadfast in my decision not to abandon my mother, enduring Rick's mistreatment while attempting to shield her from his cruelty. Rick's behavior extended beyond me. He exhibited a pattern of disrespect towards my mom, treating her as insignificant and often resorting to physical intimidation. Despite my pleas for her to leave him, my mom remained steadfast, insisting that there was more to Rick than met the eye, urging me not to judge him solely based on his actions. However, my faith in his purported goodness waned with each passing day, as his mistreatment of us continued unabated. From the moment my stepfather, Rick, entered our lives through his marriage to my mom when I was just 15, I knew we weren't going to get along. The 10 years that followed only seemed to cement that feeling, as I found myself harboring a deep-seated resentment towards him that I couldn't shake. My parents' divorce had happened when I was very young, and I spent most of my formative years under my mom's care. However, my dad always made an effort to be part of my life, even after their split. Our weekends together were cherished moments, but as I grew older, the custody arrangements changed, and I found myself spending more time with my dad, splitting my time between his place and my mom's. When I was about 16, my dad received a career opportunity that required him to move out of state, significantly reducing the time we could spend together. This coincided with my mom's marriage to Rick, a man I had never quite warmed up to. In fact, my dislike for him only seemed to intensify after their marriage. Rick's behavior towards me became increasingly hostile, almost as if he resented my presence in his and my mom's life. Living with Rick became a daily struggle. He was quick to criticize and belittle me, making it clear that he didn't want me around. His treatment of my mom was no better. He was controlling and manipulative, often pushing her around emotionally. Despite my attempts to convince her otherwise, my mom remained steadfast in her defense of Rick, insisting that he was a good man. The tension at home only escalated when I left for college. While I welcomed the opportunity to escape Rick's toxicity, I couldn't shake off the guilt of leaving my mom behind. Determined to continue supporting her, I secretly planned to visit her every other weekend. However, my efforts were met with resistance from my mom, who seemed to imply that my presence only exacerbated the situation at home. Her revelation was a painful blow. It left me questioning my role in the family dynamic and wondering if my attempts to help were doing more harm than good. Despite my father's financial support for my education, I couldn't shake off the feeling of being unwanted and rejected by the very people I had tried so hard to support. It was a tough blow, and I found myself sinking into a period of depression. However, I resolved not to return home until at least Christmas. I even opted to spend Thanksgiving break away, holing up in a hotel for the duration. When I informed my dad of my decision, He was understandably upset, but I insisted he keep it from my mom. If I was causing her problems, I reasoned, I would simply remove myself from the equation. Though I maintained some level of contact with my mom, our conversations lacked their previous warmth and eventually tapered off altogether. So, when I finally did return home for Christmas, my anticipation was muted. Instead of the warm reception I expected, I was met with an unexpected sight, a stranger exiting our house, having just finished lunch with my mom. It was then that my mom explained that the man was a tenant, as Rick had decided to rent out the first floor of our two-story house. The implications hit me like a ton of bricks. The first floor had always been mine, meaning Rick had essentially given up my space for rent. Inside, I confronted Rick about this new arrangement, his nonchalant demeanor only fueling my anger. He defended his decision, citing my absence and adult status as justification for renting out my room. His dismissive attitude only stoked the flames of my fury. In response, I called him out, questioning his lack of consideration for my return and where I would stay. His smug grin in the face of my frustration was infuriating. He seemed to believe that my father's wealth would easily resolve any inconvenience caused by his actions. Unable to contain my anger, I turned away, seething with frustration and resentment towards him. I confronted my mother about the situation, hoping for some semblance of support or objection on her part. However, her silence and bowed head were deafening. It felt like the final betrayal. In that moment, I entertained the idea of confronting Rick, demanding back what was rightfully mine. Yet, deep down, I knew it would likely be futile, a fruitless effort in reclaiming what had been callously taken from me. So, without another word, I gathered my belongings and left the house. I half expected my mother to follow, to plead or at least acknowledge my departure, but she didn't. As I waited for a cab, their voices rose in argument from inside the house. Though I couldn't discern the words, the sound of my mother's anger was oddly comforting. At least she was reacting, expressing something. That day marked the end of any semblance of a relationship with my mother, and Rick by extension. Once in the cab, I made a silent vow to never look back. I felt utterly done with her. Turning to my father, I recounted the events, finding solace in his unwavering support. He offered his home as a refuge, a place where I could always find shelter from the storm. From then on, every holiday meant a trip to see him, building a new life around his steadfast presence. Cutting ties with my grandparents followed naturally, our relationship never having been particularly close. With my dad as my sole family, we forged a bond stronger than blood. And while some might view our situation with sadness, we found contentment in each other's company. Life was good until last week, when out of the blue, my mother resurfaced after nearly 7 years of silence. She reached out to me via Facebook, emphasizing the urgency of the situation and her desperate need for my assistance. It was clear that she couldn't discuss the matter online and requested that I visit her as soon as possible. However, I had to explain that I no longer resided in the same city as them, making it logistically impossible for me to make an immediate visit. Undeterred by this obstacle, she suggested I call her instead, providing her contact number for direct communication. Despite her persistence, I declined the offer, expressing disinterest in engaging in further discussion and left the matter unresolved. Despite my lack of response, she continued to bombard me with texts over the subsequent days. Finally, she revealed the root cause of her desperation. She and Rick had acquired a significant personal loan, approximately $80,000, from Rick's employer, ostensibly to fund my education expenses. However, with the passage of time, their creditor was demanding repayment. In a bid to avoid legal ramifications, they devised a dubious plan. They wanted me to feign illness, hoping to evoke sympathy from the creditor and deter potential legal action given the binding contractual obligations they had agreed to, which included repayment with interest. In response to their request, I vehemently refused to partake in such a deceitful scheme, finding it ethically reprehensible. Even under amicable circumstances, I would have declined. Following my refusal, my mother remained silent for a few days before making another attempt to reach out to me. She disclosed that she was currently in my city and urged a face-to-face meeting. This audacious request left me incredulous, yet it underscored the severity of her predicament, as she appeared to be relying on me to extricate her from financial turmoil. Despite her persistence, I stood my ground, steadfast in my decision not to meet her. The entire situation seemed fraught with deception and potential peril, and I was unwilling to entangle myself further. Instead, I advised her to engage in open dialogue with her creditor to negotiate feasible repayment terms. Rick's boss seemed open to the plan, but my mother contacted me with a different request altogether. She expressed understanding if I chose not to assist them, but emphasized her desire to see me one last time, given her journey. Although I suspected she was bluffing, a lingering sense of nostalgia and longing for connection prompted me to agree to a meeting for lunch. Our reunion began on an emotional note, with warm embraces and teary-eyed exchanges. However, the atmosphere swiftly shifted when my mother broached the topic of the loan and her dubious scheme barely half an hour into our meeting. Frustrated and disheartened by her manipulation, I made the difficult decision to leave without a word, ignoring her calls as I hastily made my way back home. Upon reflection, I regretted allowing myself to be drawn into her deceitful ploy despite my awareness of her ulterior motives. Yet, amidst this remorse, I found solace in the knowledge that I harbored no guilt beyond this lapse in judgment, a sentiment echoed by my father. However, my mother's subsequent reaction painted a stark contrast to our perspectives. In a late-night video message, visibly intoxicated and overcome with emotion, she expressed profound disappointment in my refusal to aid her. Recalling our shared history and invoking memories of my childhood, she depicted me as her unwavering protector, making my decision to withhold assistance all the more devastating. Despite her slurred speech and tearful pleas, I struggled to decipher her words. Her disappointment hung heavily in the air, leaving me feeling a profound sense of guilt and sorrow. Despite the turmoil, my love for her remained unwavering, and the sight of her anguish tore at my heartstrings. Yet, as I grappled with conflicting emotions, I couldn't ignore the realization that her actions had brought us to this painful impasse. Caught between empathy for her plight and the need to protect myself from further manipulation, I found myself at a crossroads, uncertain of the path forward. Prison looms as a very real possibility if my mother fails to repay the loan, or if I don't intervene to buy her more time. Lost in the shuffle since marrying Rick, she was once a loving, nurturing figure in my life. This dilemma feels like an opportunity to reciprocate her past sacrifices. Yet, the risks loom large. I'm torn. While I want to support my mother, diving into this murky situation without knowing all the details feels reckless. What was the loan for, anyway? Without clarity, involvement seems unwise. Moreover, their plan is far from foolproof. If their boss sees through the facade, the consequences could be dire. I can't jeopardize my own reputation to bail them out. Am I selfish for prioritizing my well-being? It certainly feels that way. My gut tells me to steer clear, but guilt gnaws at me. I can't bear the thought of my mother behind bars. Am I wrong for refusing to aid her in dodging legal trouble? Update: I've taken the difficult step of blocking my mother. It was a necessary boundary, albeit painful. Talking to my dad reinforced my decision. Her emotional manipulation was clear. Many commenters highlighted my unresolved issues with my mother. Therapy seems like a logical next step. Reddit can't fix everything, but perhaps therapy can offer clarity and healing. It's a step toward prioritizing my own mental well-being, a consideration I hadn't fully explored until now. I delved deeper into the situation and uncovered details about Rick's boss. I'm relieved I didn't agree to my mother's request. It would have haunted my conscience. It wasn't hard to gather information. A bit of social media sleuthing revealed Rick's boss, distinguishable by his attire and demeanor in photos. What struck me most was the reason my mother and Rick thought feigning illness might sway him. His boss had tragically lost his daughter to cancer recently. It dawned on me, they planned to exploit this loss, hoping he'd empathize with a sick family member. Not only was their plan foolish, but it was also callous and insensitive to manipulate someone's grief for personal gain. Discovering this made blocking my mother an easy decision. Whoever concocted such a scheme displayed repugnant behavior, and those who endorsed it were no better. I'm relieved I didn't succumb to my mother's manipulative tactics. It's becoming clear she's more calculating than I realized. I've long felt the need to protect her, but in truth, I was the one in need of protection. a duty she failed at miserably. So, any lingering guilt has dissipated, especially after learning the depths of their deceit. Update: with my mother unable to reach me, she sought out my dad instead. It was unexpected, given their estrangement of equal length. He shared that she echoed similar sentiments as before, attempting to garner sympathy. After her persistent attempts to manipulate me into helping with her deceptive plan, I found solace in the unyielding support of my father, who stood as a bastion of reason amidst the chaos my mother had created. Despite her emotional pleas and desperate tactics, my father remained resolute in his refusal to let her manipulate me further. His unwavering stance served as a beacon of strength, reminding me that I had the right to uphold my principles and not be swayed by guilt or emotional blackmail. As my mother continued to insist on her plan, my father's steadfastness only grew stronger. He made it clear that he would not tolerate any further attempts to involve me in her deceitful schemes. Instead, he warned her of the consequences of her actions, highlighting the potential repercussions of her actions on her husband's professional reputation. It was a stark reminder of the gravity of the situation and the need for accountability. Throughout the ordeal, my father remained a pillar of support, offering guidance and reassurance in the face of my mother's relentless pleas. His unwavering belief in my integrity gave me the strength to stand firm in my decision despite the emotional turmoil it caused. And while my mother's actions left me feeling conflicted and torn, my father's steadfast presence provided a sense of clarity and purpose. In the end, my mother's desperate attempts to elicit my sympathy fell flat in the face of my father's unwavering support. His resolute refusal to bend to her will served as a powerful reminder of the importance of staying true to oneself, even in the face of adversity. And as I reflect on the events that transpired, I am grateful for the unwavering support of my father, whose steadfastness helped me navigate the complexities of a challenging situation with courage and integrity. They found themselves trapped in a predicament of their own making, resorting to deceit in a desperate attempt to extricate themselves from financial ruin. Despite her pleas for assistance, I remained steadfast in my resolve, unwilling to be drawn into their web of lies. Their past mistreatment of me left no room for sympathy or obligation. I owed them nothing. With a clear conscience, I severed ties with her, recognizing that she no longer held any claim to my loyalty or support. Her attempts to manipulate me into aiding their cause fell on deaf ears. I was resolute in my decision to distance myself from her toxic influence. In a surprising turn of events, after months of silence, she resurfaced with news of her intention to repay the loan independently. However, her message was laced with bitterness and resentment, casting blame upon me for their current plight. It was a feeble attempt to shift responsibility and absolve herself of any wrongdoing. But I refused to be swayed by her accusations or guilt-tripping tactics. I accepted her declaration of animosity with equanimity, recognizing that our relationship had reached its inevitable conclusion. With the chapter closed on our tumultuous connection, I looked forward to a future free from her toxic presence. In the end, I emerged stronger and more determined than ever to forge my own path, unencumbered by the weight of past grievances. And as I moved forward, I remained open to the possibility of new relationships and experiences, knowing that I had finally liberated myself from the shackles of a toxic past.